Should I call him and tell him you're setting it up right now?
Sure.
To take care of it.
Who's recording? So, okay.
Says he will in the password.
No pressure.
Okay, just.
I'm sure. Okay, so everyone. Okay, so good morning, good Erev Shabbos. Parsha Ve'era points out to us that there are three main groups of people, so to speak, or individuals that comprise this story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of the Exodus from Egypt. And the three are Moshe Rabbeinu himself, who we saw already last week, is hesitant about his role. The second are the people of Israel. Moshe said, "Veheim lo yaminu li." They won't believe. And at the end of last week's Parsha, we saw that the Jewish people told that to Moshe. That you made it worse. The situation has deteriorated since you came. Moshe, in turn, refers that to heaven. You didn't save us. The third facet here is Paro. Now, all three apparently have to be convinced in order for Yetzias Mitzrayim to take place. So heaven, so to speak, operates on the premise that eventually all three will agree. And Yetzias Mitzrayim is always used as a template for the eventual redemption of Israel. So the eventual redemption of Israel, I will redeem you in the same way at the end of days as I did beforehand. So again, it has to be threefold. The leadership of the people have to participate and believe. The people themselves have to. And the adversaries and the non-Jewish world also has to agree to it. And that's the outline of the Parsha. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, at the beginning of the Parsha, the Ribono Shel Olam speaks to him and says, Vayira el Avram el Yitzchak vel Yaakov. I appeared to your ancestors, to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Ushmi Hashem lo nodati lahem. And my revelation to them was not in the same level as my revelation to you is. In other words, I allow you a greater degree of revelation and understanding and relationship to me. That's what makes Moshe the Av Kol HaNeviim, the father of all the prophets. So he's the father even of the prophets that preceded him, such as Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And the unspoken message is, they didn't complain to me. They didn't say that you didn't fulfill your word. And Vegam Hakimosi. So I went ahead and I did fulfill my word. And I gave them the land of Canaan that I promised them. Rashi quotes here the Gemara, Chaval al the Abdin lo mishtachin. It's too bad what we have lost because we cannot find it again. It's not here anymore. So to speak, heaven says, the faith that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had in me, I don't find it again. You don't have it in me. So Moshe has to rise from that. And part of this entire parsha, the subplot, so to speak, is the development of Moshe. It says in the Posek, below Shomu el Moshe, the Jewish people didn't listen to Moshe, mikotze ruach ume avodah kosho. Kotze ruach is shortness, literally shortness of breath. They were working so hard. And from the heavy work that was imposed upon them. But Kotze ruach, the Abarbanel here says a remarkable thing. The Abarbanel says Kotze ruach means Kotze ruach shel Moshe. Moshe didn't have enough spirit in him. If Moshe wants to convince them, he has to be convinced. And he's wavering. He has Kotze ruach. And therefore, how can you expect that the people will be different? So we have to witness that Moshe will rise. Moshe will become greater. Moshe will not harbor any doubts anymore. So the Mefarshim point out in this week's Parsha are 7 of the 10 makos, of the 10 plagues that befell the Egyptians. Well, the question always arises, why did he need 10 plagues? He could have, it could have been short-circuited. They could have gone to Bechorot right away. What do you need there? The frogs and the lice, and what is all of that all about? So the Mefarshim explained that that really is for Moshe, not only for Paro and the Egyptians, it's for Moshe. You have to be disappointed 9 times before the 10th time happens. How do you deal with disappointment? Moshe comes to Paro, and he throws down his staff, and it becomes a serpent. He thinks, oh boy, that's it. Paro is going to whammo. Go home. Take them all with you. But Paro calls, he says, I'll match you. He brings Khartoumim who throw down their staffs and become serpents. But Mefarshim point out, Moshe is shaken. God gives him a sign, a miracle, and it's not such a sign and it's not such a miracle. The Egyptians match it. Moshe turns water into blood. The Egyptians turned water into blood. So Moshe is weakened by what happens here. He cannot push himself. The Mepharshim say, all of us know in the Torah, Moshe didn't speak for the first Makos because Aaron spoke. Aaron was the one that performed the miracle, etc. So we all know that the Torah, the Medrash, from the Cheder, that Moshe couldn't do it because the waters of the Nile saved him, so he couldn't hit the water and bring the frogs, and that the earth buried the Egyptian that he killed, so he couldn't hit the earth. So that's why Aaron is doing this. But there's an alternative explanation also brought in Midrash. Yeah, Moshe says, none of this is going to work. Why am I going to make? I'm going to make water into blood. He's going to make water into blood. I'm going to bring frogs. He's going to bring frogs. I'm going to bring lice. He's going to bring lice. So Moshe distances himself from these plagues because he knows that they're not convincing. Only when the Khartoumim say, Etzva Elohimi, oh, we can't do this, so then Moshe says, all right, now he's going to re-enter the fray. He's going to come back because now he thinks it'll work. But that doesn't work either. The next 5 Makkos don't do it. Moshe thinks a number of times, I've got it. Paro said, please pray for me. Moshe even says, when do you want that the plague should end? What time? Summertime, wintertime, tell me exactly. He's poor alive. Moshe is so triumphant. It doesn't help. They won't go anywhere. So part of the lesson is to live with disappointment. And that's all part of the development of Moshe. And that is his training, because Moshe will have to learn not to be disappointed with the Jewish people. And it's not hard not to be disappointed. Moshe will say, Mamre Me'yisem, you're a rebellious, contentious people from the first day that I know you. So why should I sacrifice myself for you, for such a people? So Moshe has to be raised from all of these levels. And we see that even later in the desert, Moshe is subject to these difficulties, to these disappointments. So how will he react? We see the greatness of Moshe, that he says to God, you have to forgive the Jewish people. If you don't forgive them, I'm not here. So if that's the development of Moshe, originally he said, Now I know why the people are enslaved, because they're gossipers, they're informers, they're traitors, they're prone to disagreement. In the desert, finally, he'll say, no, whatever they are, they're your people. Then you have to save them. So that's one piece. That piece is Moshe. And Moshe, the next 4 Chumashim are all about Moshe. The second piece are the Jewish people. Moshe comes and tells them, he tells them all the simonim, all the signs, everything. People want to believe. They want to believe they'll get out of slavery. But Moshe puts a condition that the Jewish people find hard to accept. The condition is that they have to go to Har Sinai and accept the Torah. Moshe tells them in advance. So the Midrashim are full of this idea. There are Jews that say, we exchange one slavery for another slavery. Here we're slaves to Paro, and then we're going to be slaves, to whatever the Torah ordains for us. All the do's and don'ts. We want to be free. Much of what goes on in the crazy world that we live in now is that statement. We want to be free to do anything, to be anybody, to say anything. And we find, for instance, when the Leviim were chosen, so Moshe told them, Srora ani nosein lachem. You think I'm giving you honor or capacity to rule? Avdus ani nosein lachem. I'm making you servants and slaves. So there's a great proportion of the Jewish people that say, listen, we would rather, basically they're saying, we would rather be slaves to Paro than to be slaves to the Torah. We saw that in our time. We'd rather be slaves to Stalin, to Marx, than to have to observe the Torah. So the Jewish people have to develop. They have to get over that. And not all of them do. That's what Chazal meant. That a proportion of the Jewish people never got out of Egypt. So there were a number of incidents that the Medrash teaches us. There was an incident that the tribe of Ephraim tried to leave on their own. The Medrash seems to indicate there were 30,000. And they did leave. They came in the desert and they died out. The Medrash tells us that it's their bones that were the bones that were revived by the prophet Yechezkel in the famed vision of the valley of the dead bones that he resurrected. So they went out because they're going to do it on their own. Not going to do it because they have to go to Sinai. They're going. And then you had, we don't know how many there are wild figures that appear in the Medrash, numbers that are beyond their comprehension, of Jews who died out in Egypt and didn't go. Hundreds of thousands, millions, who knows? They didn't go. There was a time at the beginning of the Cold War. So Bertrand Russell, the famous British socialist, fellow traveler, so he coined the phrase, better red than dead. Okay, so we'll all be communists. So, but we'll live. Why should we fight them? So you have to somehow get the Jewish people going. You got to get them to agree. You got to push them. And that's what the Navi will say. The everlasting credit of the Jewish people is they did go. Yeah. The nature of slavery is that the slave not only becomes accustomed, but accepts the role psychologically and physically. It is noted that in the American South, after the American Civil War, which legally abolished slavery, most of the slaves remained on the same plantations of their masters that they were before. Took 2, 3, 4 generations for them to move and to come into society. The Gemara says, "Avdo b'efkeira nechole." Slaves adjust to their society, to their status. So we have to raise Moshe Rabbeinu, and then we have to raise the Jewish people. Moshe realizes that, therefore he will say later, you have given me the mission to raise this people. The generation of slaves, the Ibn Ezra, the Ramban, and all the Meforshim say that that generation could not have gone into the land of Israel because psychologically they're not prepared to be an independent people. They still have a slave mentality. So how are they going to face the Knanim and the Chiti and the Amori, Brizi? So Moshe said, my job is halas omazeh, to raise these people. And you didn't tell me how to do it. That's the problem. What's the magic bullet here? The third piece of the puzzle is good old Paro. The Khartoumim said to him, Haterem Teda ki Yovdo Mitzrayim. Don't you see that Egypt is being destroyed in front of your eyes? Shalach us on, send them already. How many more plagues are we subject to suffer? What's going to happen with us? Pharaoh is immune to that. Pharaoh is the true believer. The true believer is never shaken by facts or reality. He believes till the end. There was an American longshoreman who worked on the docks, and he was a great philosopher. His name was Eric Hoffer. He was an Ohev Yisrael. He was, so he wrote a little book, about 100 pages. It's called The True Believer, in which he outlines this mentality. So he was talking about the communist world. It makes no difference what the facts are. It makes no difference that I can't prove anything that I'm saying. It's sufficient that I believe it, which is just the most exalted form of narcissism which exists, that I'm always right. And that's Paro. Paro is well aware of what's happening to Egypt. But he has a program. His program is that the Jews should remain. So he cannot be diverted from his program because he knows that that is what is right. And he will pursue it no matter what the cost is. We see that in all dictatorships. And we see it also in governments that are not quite dictatorships. You're convinced that that's what it is. So we're convinced. We have no proof. That makes no difference. It goes against logic, makes no difference. It turns out to be disastrous, makes no difference. Still believe in it. And that's especially a disease of academia, who never are wrong, but who have the uncanny ability never to be right. So that's Paro. Paro says, "Be Hashem, what God? What should I listen to? I know what to do. I know what's right. I know what's good for Egypt." So even when they tell him, "Aterem teidach yovdo Mitzrayim," you're destroying Egypt, he doesn't waver. The question is the hardness of the heart of Paro, right? Hiksha Hashem es libo. So there are all sorts of interpretations as to what that means. But one of the interpretations, it's brought in the Hasidic Sforim especially, is that he convinced himself. If you convince yourself, then your heart is so hard that no one can unconvince you. And God gives people the ability to convince themselves. That's ki hiksha Hashem eslei Paro. He gave him the ability to do so. And he did it. So even after Bechorot, and even after the Jewish people leave, he's going to pursue them again. Still didn't learn his lesson. He's got tens of thousands of corpses in Egypt, and he's going ahead. Because he knows better. But that's a remarkable insight into the human character. It helps explain many things that occur in the world, if we but observe this with a realistic view. So this is the threefold part of the Parsha. Moshe, the Jewish people, Paro. All of them have to come to an understanding, to an appreciation of what is really happening. And so therefore, that's the backdrop to the story in which all of the details fit and become the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you for coming, and stay well and have a great Shabbat. How are you? How are you? Good to see you. Good chats.